The phone call was short, colder than I ever imagined it would be, and it shattered something inside me that I didn't even know was still breakable. My son, the child I had carried for 9 months, raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights, the boy who once used to scream if I left his room before he fell asleep, now told me bluntly that I wasn't welcome this Christmas. Not this year. He used words like space. We need our own traditions, and it's too much with the kids, as if I had ever been too much. I listened quietly, trying not to let my voice crack, but I'm sure he noticed the pause before I whispered, "Okay, I understand," but I didn't. I didn't understand how a mother becomes a stranger to her own child. I didn't understand how memories of stringing popcorn garlands and staying up until midnight wrapping presents had faded into this detached, rehearsed rejection. I sat there after the call, staring at the blank wall in my quiet home, and let the silence scream everything I couldn't say aloud. For decades, I gave him everything, scraped together money for birthday gifts, cooked when I was sick, comforted him through breakups, and stood by him when his father abandoned us. Now, with his own family, he cast me aside like a seasonal decoration no longer needed. I didn't cry, not then, but my hands shook as I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept his mortgage receipts, and stared at the payment stub I had planned to send next week. I had been helping him pay for his house for the last 2 years, since his job took a downturn. Every month, without complaint, without question, because that's what mothers do. But suddenly a thought entered my mind. What if I stopped? What if I decided that rejection went both ways? What if I reminded him that support wasn't unconditional when respect had already been withdrawn? It wasn't revenge that made me do it. At least, not at first. It was hurt, raw and pulsing, the kind that makes you reevaluate everything you thought was unshakable. I sat at the table for hours, remembering things, little things, like how I used to tape extra candy canes to his lunchbox in December, how I stayed up knitting him scarves every winter, how I worked double shifts at the diner so he could have a school trip he was excited about. My life had revolved around him, and I never minded, not once. So now, this unexpected distance, this holiday dismissal, it felt like someone had changed the rules. Halfway through a game I thought I understood, and I realized something dangerous in that moment. I had been clinging to an idea of motherhood that was built on sacrifice, assuming love would always be enough to keep us close. But love, when one-sided, becomes a chain. That night, I tore up the mortgage check. It wasn't dramatic, no ceremonial fire or angry texts, just me, in my pajamas, holding thin pieces of paper that once symbolized devotion, now reduced to meaningless scribbles. I went online and paused the automatic payment. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel?" And for the first time in a long time, I was. I clicked yes. I didn't tell him. I figured he'd find out soon enough, and when he did, I wanted him to sit with the silence the way I had after his call. I wanted him to stare at an empty room and realize what it feels like when support disappears without a trace. When the person you took for granted chooses not to show up anymore. That was the gift I gave myself this Christmas. The power to say no without apology. The power to walk away from being taken for granted. The days passed slowly after that, each hour stretching like taffy, sticky, and too long. I avoided looking at the decorations in the closet, the ornaments I'd collected over the years from dollar stores and thrift shops, each one with a story, each one linked to a holiday that once felt warm and magical. I didn't bake cookies or play music. I didn't light the fireplace. My house stayed quiet, and for the first time in decades, I was okay with that. There was something cleansing about the quiet, like I was finally hearing my own thoughts without the weight of obligation pressing down on me. My neighbor Linda invited me over for Christmas Eve dinner. I declined, not because I wasn't grateful, but because I needed to be alone. I needed to sit with my decision, to face the consequences of drawing a line I had never dared to draw. Before I knew my son would be confused, maybe even angry. I imagined the moment he'd check his account and realize the payment hadn't gone through. I imagined the conversation with his wife, maybe even the argument. I wondered if he'd call, if he'd finally reach out. But part of me didn't want him to. Not yet. Not until he understood the weight of what he'd done, not just canceling a visit, but making me feel unnecessary, like a burden. I wasn't asking to be worshipped. I was asking to be treated like someone who mattered, like family. And until he could do that, I had nothing to offer. Not love, not money, not presents. The irony of it all was that I hadn't even been excited about the trip initially. Traveling during winter wasn't easy at my age. The flights, the cold, the energy it took to be cheerful for the grandkids, all of it was exhausting. But I would have done it anyway, gladly, because seeing them smile, being part of the chaos, feeling like I belonged, was worth every ache and effort. His phone call didn't just cancel plans, it erased my presence. It told me I wasn't essential, and once I saw myself through that lens, something inside me snapped. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. I started thinking about all the times I had bent over backward for others. Not just him, but my siblings, my coworkers, my so-called friends. I had always been the helper, the one who showed up, the one who listened, but who showed up for me. Who listened when I was tired or scared or lonely, I had been taught to find pride in being selfless, but now I saw it for what it was, a slow erosion of self. So this year, for the first time, I decided to give myself a gift. I ordered takeout from the fancy Italian place downtown. I watched my favorite old movies wrapped in a blanket, not because it was a replacement for family, but because I deserved peace. I deserved joy on my own terms. The world didn't end because I said no. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. On the morning of December 26th, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, my heart did the thing it always did, that little leap of hope. But I didn't answer, not right away. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to hear his voice without speaking first, without surrendering the strength I had just found. He sounded unsure, almost sheepish. Hey mom, da. I noticed the mortgage didn't get paid, just wondering if everything's okay. That was it. No apology, no mention of Christmas, no acknowledgement of the call that had caused this rift, just a nudge back into the routine, as if I would pick up the pieces and carry on. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who had finally realized that being a mother didn't mean being a martyr. I texted back simply, "You asked for space. I'm giving it. Finances included." He didn't reply for a few hours. Then he called again 3 times. I didn't pick up. I needed him to sit in that discomfort, to understand that my value wasn't tied to my willingness to be used. That evening, he sent a long message, finally saying he was sorry, that things had been stressful, that he hadn't meant to push me away. But intentions don't erase impact. I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself from disappointment, from the hollow feeling that comes when your love is treated like an afterthought. I thought about the years I spent cleaning up after him, staying up when he had fevers, teaching him to tie his shoes, to read, to drive, the laughter, the heartbreaks, the milestones. They were all etched in my memory, vivid and sacred. And yet here we were, reduced to transactions and apologies that came only when comfort was disrupted. I didn't need the money I was giving him. That wasn't the point. The point was that I gave it because I loved him, because I believed in supporting him the way no one ever supported me. I had built a life from scratch, with no safety net. I didn't want that for him, but he mistook my help for obligation, my silence for acceptance. And when he withdrew affection, he expected the benefits to remain. That was no longer acceptable. The next day he called again, and this time, I answered. His voice was low, embarrassed, almost wounded. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I was taking you for granted." I didn't rush to forgive him. I listened. I let the silence stretch. And then I said, "Love isn't something you can switch off when it's inconvenient. And neither is support." He tried to explain how hard things had been with the kids, the pressure of work, the chaos of life. I nodded. "I understand." I said, "But so do I. I have chaos too. I just don't make you feel like a burden because of it." He was quiet for a long time. In that pause, something shifted. Not everything was healed. Not yet, but something had cracked open. He finally saw me not as a service provider or a background character in his life, but as a person with boundaries and value. We talked for nearly an hour. I didn't promise to reinstate the payments. In fact, I told him that moving forward he would need to budget without depending on me. He accepted that, maybe reluctantly, but he did, and that was a start. Later that night, he sent me photos of the kids with handmade cards that said, "We miss you, Grandma." I smiled. I saved them. But I didn't let that erase the lesson. I had learned something powerful in those few days, that love without respect corrodes the soul, that giving should come from joy, not pressure, that sometimes to be heard, you have to stop speaking and let absence do the talking. I started planning a trip, not to his place, but for myself. A week by the ocean, somewhere warm, with nothing to do but read and breathe and be. It felt indulgent. It also felt necessary. Because healing, like motherhood, is hard work. And I was finally choosing to heal, not for him, but for me. By New Year's Eve, I had let go of the anger, but kept the clarity. My son and I were talking, again, more carefully now, more aware of the fragile thread that connects love and behavior. He asked if I'd come visit in January. I said I'd think about it, and I meant it. I wasn't playing games. I was simply taking time to decide what I needed, what I wanted, and whether his home, our relationship, was a safe place to land again. He was learning. I was healing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on emotional eggshells. I was grounded. Calm, sure of my worth. That Christmas may have started with rejection and silence, but it ended with truth and awakening. I had spent a lifetime giving love freely. Now, I was learning to give it wisely. Not every story wraps up neatly. Ours is still being written slowly, intentionally, one honest moment at a time. And maybe that's the most powerful ending of all. Not the dramatic gesture, not the revenge, but the quiet decision to choose self-respect over silent suffering. And in that, I found a peace that no holiday gathering could ever give me.